Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Up Close and Empowered. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for listening. And this is where my hopes are to inspire you to awaken to your true power. Yes, we are all about empowerment on this show and really diving deep at times, which today is going to be one of the more deeper shows. And I love going really deep. And I have a great guest on today that I'm really looking forward to having her here today because really she is an expert in this field. And if any of you want to call in later, I will give a number if you want to call in after the break. You can ask a question, but the power of our subconscious mind controls a lot of our life. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. My guest is Tara Kabatoff, and she is a dedicated speaker, a teacher, and intuitive healer with a profound focus on the shadow self. She specializes in shedding the light on the deeper and darker aspects of the subconscious. Having experienced her own profound transformation, Tara delved into her spiritual practice, exploring the realms of the shadow, self, and deep subconscious. She recognized the power of self actualization and became very passionate about empowering others to become their own self healers and creators of their reality. Tara's mission is rooted in the desire to seek everyone or help everyone break free from their limitations and find comfort and peace with their authentic self and their whole being. She has a diverse background, which led her to her current path. And we're going to hear more about that today. I believe that she will also share some deeper truths for the first time. So, this is a very special show. And I am really honored to have her here and to share some of her experiences that I am hoping will inspire and spark an interest in you, where you may be able to relate and get some really great knowledge from this show and know that you are more powerful than you really know. So, with that, we're going to get started. Tara, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. That intro was absolutely amazing. I'm so honored to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Like I said, this is one of my deeper shows, but it's such an important show. It's
Mhm.
such an important aspect of our healing and really getting to know ourselves. And, for the listeners out there, there may be some that are familiar with the shadow self, and there may be some that aren't. So, I am going to have Tara first tell us about her story, and then we're going to get into what is the shadow self, what is the dark night of the soul, what do we need to know about our subconscious? What are those limiting beliefs that we have, self sabotage? We're going to get into a lot of that. This is going to be a great show. I'm hoping to get all of it in this hour. But first, let's hear more about Tara's story because I think that what she's experienced throughout her life and where she is now, it's been a journey, right, Tara?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, it
can you take
has.
us back and take us through that journey and how
Mhm.
you were led to where you are today?
Right. And you're completely right with this topic. I mean, we could have such a lengthy conversation about this. And I had thought about, I constantly think about my story. I constantly reflect and look back at what happened here to make this happen today, or what made me who I am and think and feel the way I feel today about myself or about the world. And this has been a real profound process of peeling back those layers into history, going back into my childhood, going back into ancestral, going back into time and connecting the dots with what has shaped me to who I am today, and also how to unravel some of those patterns and beliefs that had been ingrained since early life. So my early life, had been quite difficult. I truly feel that I know that I've chosen this path in some way. I know that I've chosen this path of hardship, of difficulties, of struggle, and I've had a very fiery and passionate energy. The more restricted and the more confined I was in childhood, the more I fought it. So growing up, I had, quite a lot of difficulty. I mean, I come from a family of Russian immigrants. We immigrated, well, my great-grandparents, sorry, immigrated from Russia into Canada, and that probably begins the story of my past, really, when I think back at the the influences that have been brought into my family, and the hardship and the fear and the struggle and the pain and the sorrow and just this like really heavy energy and heavy experiences. And so it just was a natural progression of what happened in our family based on the past, truly.
Mhm.
So I was a byproduct of that. I grew up, I wasn't heard, I wasn't seen, I wasn't understood. There was so much fighting and so much pain, and I saw it. And being an empath and being a sensitive person, it was really hard. It was so hard because I could see the pain in my parents. I could see the anger, but I also was becoming affected. So naturally I started to push back. So I started to rebel. I started to become angry. I started to basically integrate some of the patterns of anger and relationship conflicts in how I was interacting with my relationships moving on in life in my early teenage years. And so when I was probably, I believe, 14 years old, around grade 9, I really started to detach from school. So I didn't care about school. I didn't want to go to school. I was hating my life. I was just really starting to fall into a low self-esteem, low self-worth pattern. And my grades started to become affected. I just became disengaged. And naturally, the the school system, diagnosed me, or I guess the counselor or psychologist on staff or someone diagnosed me with having a learning disability. So into a private school I went, which actually truthfully was a really beautiful school. It was very, very well maintained and really high quality teachers and classrooms. And it was just a really beautiful place to be. Was there for 2 years. Then I went back into this regular school system afterwards to finish my high school. So when I went back into the system, I basically felt that I was stupid, that I had a disability because I was labeled. Meanwhile, the house and home environment was becoming extremely unsafe and very unhealthy to be in. And I just couldn't measure up to anyone else in school. I felt inadequate. I felt incompetent. I felt that I couldn't even succeed if I tried because I had a learning disability. So I barely finished high school, barely finished. I ended up going a bit rogue. My first boyfriend was, one of those older boys who hung around, the bad boy, kind of
Of course,
personality type.
of course.
And it was so toxic. We fought just like the relationship that I saw at home and my family relationships. That was the first relationship. He cheated on me. It was so unhealthy, and drugs and alcohol, and it just kept perpetuating from there on. And eventually I ended up kind of picking myself up again and putting myself back in school. I found my passion. It was in technology and digital media marketing. I ended up getting a wonderful career. I ended up landing into a pretty high-end agency, but I was really suffering inside. I had developed also an eating disorder. I was developing addictions, alcoholism, and I lived for the weekends. I loved my work, but I also loved to party. And basically, if as soon as Friday was over, I would just live and have fun and get crazy and then go back into work. And I lived this cycle for so long. And it eventually caught up to me. And this shame that I had within me of having this learning disability, having all these other disabilities and illnesses within myself, within my mental health, really preventing me from feeling, of course, comfortable in my own skin, feeling of
Mhm.
worth. And it eventually started to affect my work. Although I worked so hard to win awards and to prove myself and to have a name. And when you're in these, well, I'll speak to my industry in particular, but when you're part of really high performing culture,
Mhm.
it's all about performance. So what awards have you won? What clients are you working on? And that's sort of it, basically. So as long as you're performing well, as long as you're on these good clients and having that sort of status around you,
Mhm.
then you're someone, you're something, then you exist in this environment, in that kind of level. And so that's all I was chasing. I was, and also too, being a bit of a black sheep in the family, I was really trying hard to prove that I am smart, that I am
Mhm.
capable. My brother got his PhD, London School of Economics. I'm like kind of like worthless, essentially, in my mind.
Right.
That's how I was feeling. So I was constantly pushing and pushing and pushing. I had part-time jobs when I had my full-time job. I had a startup when was working 9, 10, 11 hours full-time in the corporate environment. And eventually over time, it just caught up with me. I was just so ill. I was so unwell, and the system that I was in within myself, I wouldn't say system, but I guess from a psychology standpoint, the subconscious belief system, the limiting beliefs that I had within myself became very natural. So the pain and the depression and the sorrow and the anger that I was in just felt normal because I
Mhm.
was
Mhm.
living with it for years. So I didn't even really know that I had a problem. I knew I didn't like where I was, but I didn't know what that meant, where I was needed to change. So I was always chasing something better. I was always, oh, I just need to go here in order to get better or to have a better life.
Mhm.
So I would move to one place to another. I moved every 2 years, two
Wow.
to three
Yeah.
years
Yeah.
since
When
I
we're
was 17. That's insane. I'm
Yeah. So
40,
you were seeking
47.
that validation or trying to find that wholeness, and you were just running and working and just getting
Yeah.
so caught up that you really didn't connect to yourself.
Yeah. And I couldn't even connect with the truth of how bad it was.
Mhm.
It just was perpetuated. And then I ended up getting into professional, not well, semi-pro cycling. I competed a lot. I ended up working with an Olympic coach, and I was aiming to go to the world championships. I was quite good, actually. I
Wow.
started later in life. I think it was 31, but I was winning. I was on the
Mhm.
podium pretty much every race, every race. And I had that kind of hidden talent that I tapped into, and I loved it. But also the endorphins that you get from
Mhm.
it, the
Yes.
release, the escape was like my sanctuary, essentially. So I loved it. I really did. But it also, going into that period of time, I was fit, but I wasn't healthy, you know.
Right. Right. Because
And
your
there's a
mind,
difference.
the mind has to be healthy.
It
It's not
has to
just the
be.
body, the mind is
Exactly.
very important.
Yeah, yeah. And I should say through a lot, I think when I was 14, I saw a shaman. My mom introduced me to a medicine woman when I was really young for dream work. And I always had that little bit of curiosity about life, more than life,
Mhm.
spiritual. Like, who am I? Why are
Mhm.
these things happening? What is the meaning of life? And I always just would find myself in certain periods going into this practice, meditation. I went to a retreat when I turned 30, and I was probably the youngest person there. I mean, this was before it was, really cool and a lot of people were going. So, I still had a little bit of that happening in the background. And it wasn't until about five years ago where everything just came crumbling, falling apart. And I was pushing so hard again well, by that time, I had quit cycling. I was getting back into the startup world. I had my own business, and I was fired for success, but I was so self-conscious. I had such low worth. I would stutter when I would speak. I
Mm.
mean, there were so many I had my eating disorder. I had alcoholism. I mean, I was depressed, and I couldn't break out of that cycle. But again, I couldn't see it. Right.
Right.
And then eventually I was making really bad decisions out of desperation for
Mm.
work. I was teaming up with really horrible, horrible business people who took advantage of me, the big, like the big talker, big money, big flashy. We got this. But under the
Well, yeah.
surface, we knew
Yeah.
we know what's really going on there. Yeah, no, I fell into some really bad stuff and got wiped out. I got wiped out. I got to the point where I didn't want to live anymore. I just got to that point where just things were just chipping away, where I just became completely flat out. I don't know what to do. I couldn't
Mhm.
see a way out except for just ending my life, essentially, because it was too much to even carry. So I packed up my things. I went to my mom's house, and that was the start of the dark night of the soul. So we can talk about that
Yeah.
later as well. But that was the initiation into it. Basically, the universe was saying, you need to stop. You need to stop. We're going to take care of you. We're going to put you in a nurturing environment, and you need to look in. You need to look
Right.
within and make those changes. And that was hugely transformative, but it didn't come easy. It changed my life
Right.
completely. Now I'm
Right.
coming around from that about 4 years ago,
Hmm.
coming around completely different. Of course, it changed everything for me, and it opened my eyes to our shadow, to the subconscious, to the
Hmm.
interconnectedness within our mind, our heart, our emotions, our body, our behaviors, and also looking back and understanding the web. I had so much resentment over how I was raised and my family and
Hmm.
everything, but I see, I see why everything had to happen the way that it did, why the dynamics of my family environment and of the history of their family,
Hmm.
and how it really played into what was happening in my life. And through this 4 years of going into the spiritual practice, I became in tune with my whole self. I started to understand more of myself. I started to see more and witness more and connect the dots within all of these different areas of my life, in the areas that were blocked, that were hidden. And that's
Right.
in the subconscious, that's in the shadow.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's almost like all the pieces came together.
Mhm.
And when you get to that point where the pieces are coming together, it's like, ah, I get it, and then all those nudges from the universe, like, over and over and over and more condensed, like things just really getting to a point where you didn't know what to do anymore. I mean, that's really, we're being nudged. I mean, these
Yes.
things keep happening. There's a message there. So I want to hear a little bit more about how you were like not tapping into your intuition, because I know you're a little bit intuitive as it is, and how
Very,
you got away
very
from like
intuitive.
not listening. Like, what were you doing ignoring? So we're going to talk about
Mhm.
that in a minute. We're going to need to take a short break here. So after the short break, we're going to dive in a little more, and then what was that turning point, that pivotal moment for you? And then we're going to talk about the shadow self and the dark night of the soul. And if anyone does want to call in for a question, 888-346-9141, 888-346-9141. We'll be back right after the break. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Talking to Tara Kabatoff on the shadow self. Shine Your Light on the Shadow is what the name of the show is. And we're diving really deep, hearing her story, the first half of the show. And for those that may want to call in, I am going to throw the number out there again, 888-346-9141. If you do have a question on any of the things that we're talking about or the power of the self-conscious mind, we are here to respond. So, Tara, I want to know, like before the break, obviously you told us you were taking us through your story. What was the turning point? Like what happened? Was it a slow turning point or was like, did something just hit you? And what made you start really diving into the subconscious mind, the shadow self? And then I want you to also tell us a little bit about the shadow self and what that
Mhm.
journey was like.
Mhm. Right. So where I left off basically was packing everything in, coming to my mom's place, and she has a beautiful 4-acre property nestled in this very nurturing environment in wilderness. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's very comfortable and calm. And I found myself just starting to relax, just starting to slow
Hmm.
down. And I knew I didn't want to go back. So the only way to keep moving was to be open to maybe trying some new things and seeing where that would lead. And you mentioned that my intuition, I just want to also quickly touch on that too. My intuition my whole life has been very strong.
Hmm.
I never listened to it. I never listened to it. Even in my gut, I would feel so wrong about certain decisions and being around certain people and in certain situations. I didn't listen to it, never
Hmm.
listened to it, but I didn't know, I didn't know. And so with that, when I was at my mom's, I ended up stumbling upon YouTube on some tarot readers,
Hmm.
going into the zodiac readings, right? And I was so fascinated by this. I had never really gotten into tarot. I've had a couple psychic readings before. Well, it sort of left me a little bit bitter. I think you and I had this conversation earlier beforehand too. And I picked up these a deck of tarot, but I started learning about what it meant, what each card meant. I wanted to
Mhm.
know the exact details. I wanted to know as much information. I wanted to know what these cards meant. They were so complex and held so much symbolic value. And so down the rabbit hole I went. I studied them, I researched, I was watching videos, and every single card related to something that I had experienced deeply. And every card held a psychological reference, an emotional reference, a spiritual reference, a practical reference. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is our life. These cards are resembling our life, our cycles of life. And so that is what started it all. So I went really deep into
Ah,
reading. I just had a knack for it. I was so in tune because I could relate to every card because this is what I
right.
had been going through. And the way, and I mentioned to you before we started the show too, that I have been on such an inward journey. Yes, I've seen psychologists. Yes, I've seen healers. I've done an ayahuasca journey of plant medicine. I've tried everything,
Mhm.
but the majority of the work that I've done and a lot of self was I should say through self-reflection, was through going inward, spending
Yes.
a lot of time by myself
Mhm. Very
and
important. Very, very
contemplating
important.
very. And this helped me understand these cards and people, and my senses started to increase. So my
Mm.
intuition and my sense of connection and feelings and interpreting other people and their energy and their feelings became very strong. So
Mhm. Mhm.
I did a lot of readings. I was also working with a healer at that time who was my mentor on subconscious work as well. And it
Mhm.
was very, I found very complimentary, sort of understanding the unseen, untapped part of ourselves with energy or with the tarot, for example, and then the subconscious, which is more the psychological aspect of
Mhm.
understanding, well, what is what is our belief system, our false belief system that we have deep ingrained, and how is that manifesting in our life? How is it influencing our body, our behaviors, our thoughts, our emotions? Because it's all connected. But the root,
Mhm.
everything is the subconscious. So if you believe that the world is unsafe, if you grew up in an environment where you had an unsafe family environment, then you're going to in some way see everything in the world or things in the world that are going to be unsafe. You're going to see them and you're going to create them because you feel deep down that the world is unsafe. And so that's just one example, but
It's a good
I s
example too. It's a really good
right.
one. I mean, think about that because if you're not feeling safe as a child in whatever
Mhm.
way, then you're gonna grow up having fear. And I do wanna we're gonna talk about fear today because I
Oh,
definitely
yeah.
wanna make sure that we
Yeah.
get into that. But that's a really great example. So it's really a lot of times our childhood and a lot of the things that we didn't really realize at the time, even until we're older, like a lot of times we don't realize this until we get much older, how our family played a role. And, just, they did the best they could. I mean, we're all learning and growing in, it's just, we were subjected to certain things that definitely affect our subconscious.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It comes from our family. It comes from societal pressures. It comes from
Hmm.
cultural pressures. I remember when I was back in the agency world, I read a book called, what was it called? Culture, Culture Jam, I think. And it had and it was, I think it was written in the 80s. And it had this, a man with a shaved head and a barcode on the back of his neck. And I read this book and I just went, whoa, we are so affected by media and
Hmm.
marketing and of course social media. And it's just been this like massive, massive machine roll or snow, I wouldn't say snowball rolling
Right.
downhill and collecting momentum and growing as a serious problem in society. How are we supposed to connect with our authenticity with who we truly are if we feel that we should be like other people or we should have what marketing is selling us or if we should, and that's also what killed my career, by the way. It really did. It did. As soon as I read that, I was like, "Oh, my career's done."
Right.
But
Right.
I also still push forward because I was on that
Yeah,
trajectory
you're
already.
on a
So
different
yeah,
journey for sure. Definitely. Well, tell us a little bit more about, for people that aren't familiar, what is the shadow self?
Mhm.
And we also talk about the dark night of the soul when we go through these really difficult times of, we don't know what we're going through, but can you kind of give us an overview for the listeners that aren't really familiar, what shadow work really is, the dark side, maybe a couple examples, and then also the dark night of the soul.
Right. So the shadow is actually, it was coined by Carl Jung, who is a psychoanalyst, psychiatrist, probably, well, around the same time as Freud. So I think his career probably peaked around the 1930s.
Mhm.
And he coined the shadow. He was the one who's kind of like basically brought it to light and shone light on the shadow. And the shadow is an aspect within ourselves that we can be often uncomfortable with. We can disregard it. We can numb it out. We can be disgusted with it and shamed with it. Like I said, with myself having eating disorder, being very judgmental and angry and ashamed. Shame is a big one. Fear is really big in there as well. And we have
Resentment, resentment.
resentment,
Yeah.
totally. And also go into the body aspects too, because those resentment, in the studies that I've worked on with Dr. Michael Lincoln, resentment actually leads to cancer. Anger creates inflammation. If you can think of your body like really burning up, but
100%.
yeah,
Mhm.
and these are in the shadow. And so these are in the unconscious aspects. So it will come out in unconscious ways. So we may lash out at someone. We may conceal ourselves. We may be in
Mhm.
shame and not want to speak our truth or feel comfortable expressing ourselves. We may criticize or cast judgment towards others, but it's really coming from something that has not been acknowledged within ourselves. So it comes in very unconsciously, and it's a very repressed. It can be a very repressed part of ourselves, but it's not to be seen as something to be ashamed of. It's actually, when we witness it and when we understand it, we're shining light on those
Right.
hidden aspects within ourselves. So we need to see it. We need to also embrace it and integrate it. Why am I acting this way? And the more work that you do with your shadow, the more aware you become, and it becomes second nature. It just becomes a natural uh experience of understanding yourself more, healing,
Mhm.
integrating, accepting, forgiving, loving,
Mhm.
acceptance, and you reach your authenticity. And your authentic self is what is buried deep within. So when we're really angry and frustrated about our life and our path and what isn't working, it's because we're
Mhm.
not in alignment. We're not living in our truth. We're not living how we're meant to live. And so that comes out in such destructive
Right.
energy, emotions, words, actions, feelings, everything. And the dark night of the soul, not everyone will experience the dark night of the soul, I feel, and just from what I've studied, but it's a very, very profound death of the ego and death of our old self. And it in my experience, I can only speak from my experience with this one, very, very, very difficult. It feels like you are losing your mind, because you are losing your mind. You're losing your
Mhm.
ego. You're
Mhm.
losing what you've been used, or how you've been used to living and functioning. And so everything's getting shook. And you're
Right.
going through that very, very profound period of death and rebirth. And I also have to say that when we go through depression, when humanity goes through depression, that is actually an incredible opportunity to create change. And it's unfortunate that when we go into these really dark times within ourselves, it's scary. It's scary. We don't know what's going on. It's hard to make sense of. And we get medicated. We get
Mhm.
medicated,
Mhm.
or we turn to alcohol. We want to numb it out because it becomes very uncomfortable. And so it's really important to understand how to work with this and know that you're okay. There's nothing wrong with you. Everything that you are experiencing is a biological result from something deeper that does need to be looked at. And once you look at it, then your life will begin to change. And so the dark night of the soul is a profound death of the ego, and it's very painful. It can be scary. It's very uncertain. But again, with that change, gives you a new life. It gives
Right.
you new perception. It gives you your alignment with who you really are. I mean, it's a
Mhm.
beautiful process, but it is, of course, it's difficult, right?
Right. So that takes a lot of self-awareness and
Mhm.
And someone, I believe, like, when you are going through a time like that, it is important to have some kind of a mentor or a coach or a
Mhm.
healer, somebody to help you through that when you really don't understand what's going on, but it's definitely part of the whole process.
Yeah. Yeah,
So, yeah.
it is. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
so was there something else you wanna say?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
It's okay.
So, I'm curious, if somebody is wants to explore their shadow self, what is the first step? What would they do?
The first step is being aware. If you have an impulsive reaction to something,
Mm,
if it is anger, if it is resentment, if there's frustration, loneliness,
mhm,
uh, down energy, depression, even alcoholism. Um, and I want to say, if you want to drink every now and then, there's nothing wrong with that. But
mhm,
just checking in, is there a need or a crutch or a go to?
mhm.
If there's something unconscious that you're used to operating in a pattern or a habit, for example, that isn't necessarily healthy, just take a look and see where it's coming from. Alcoholism, from and addictions, I should just say in general, from the work I've been studying, has to do with our desire to connect with source, to connect with something that we feel disconnected from, right? So
Mhm.
it's this from the book Michael J. Lincoln, he says it is getting high closer to God. So when we are in that state of being, which is a detached state from a reality, we become where we're trying to go is to become closer to source and feel connected and feel part of something bigger. And
Mhm.
so I went off track a little bit, but anything that is habitual or that you may not have seen before that may create something unhealthy, just look into it and see maybe where that's coming from.
Right, so
And
let's
with
say they're self-reflecting and there's a lot of resentment because of blame, they're angry, they have not forgiven, which so they're holding on to that. So isn't there a point where you do wanna connect it to doing some inner child work, like really going back into your family systems to see where these thoughts and this anger and some of this stuff has come from? Because people think it's anger from what's present in their life, but it's usually deep rooted in our subconscious,
exactly.
correct?
Yep. Yeah. And it is connecting the dots so that it is first seeing what is in the shadow. Also, I should say the collective shadow of maybe people we are attracting and people in our lives because we tend
Mhm.
to like attracts like, and we get comfortable in that collective shadow. And then going back into past and seeing connecting the dots with our behaviors and our perceptions and our actions, and where that truly is coming from, but also the belief system attached to it. So it could
Mhm.
be from growing up in life. It could be ancestral cultural situation that happened. I've worked with someone who grew up in a very, very traumatic environment where there were bombs and gunfire going
Mhm.
off. And
Mhm.
so you just connect the dots and how that has. So for instance, this one particular person had so much fear and became very rigid and very locked in without even realizing. So
Right.
um, it can show up in so many different ways. And it's just through observation and looking back at the past with compassion, not with anger. We need to move away from holding on to the past of what hasn't happened, what hasn't worked, so that we can move on into a new future. If we're living in the past, we're not allowing ourselves to break free and heal from the past and cut those ties to the past emotionally, psychologically, energetically. So it does allow us to create more separation from being enmeshed within that experience of the past.
Mhm. And don't you think that relationships, we're going to be taking a break here in a minute, but this is a really good question, I think, because I know it can relate to a lot of people. Don't you think that some of the relationships, like a lot of our relationships, are our biggest mirror? Like
Oh,
we learn
huge.
so much about ourselves
Mhm.
from being in relationships, healthy,
Mhm.
not healthy, toxic, whatever.
Mhm.
That shines a light on us, right?
Big time. And it's important not to look at the other people as they're the problem.
Right.
It's just
Hmm.
it's being observant, and they're triggering. If we look at them as the problem, they're triggering that thing that we need to look at. Like, why are we blaming them when they're just being who they are? Everyone has problems. They're coming from their
Yes.
place of hurt.
Yes.
We're coming from our place of hurt.
Hmm.
You're putting two people in the same room with
Right.
hurt. So how do we reach that resolution? How do we reach that place of common understanding and work through this rather than feeding the cycle?
Right, and they can
Like,
only meet us where they are consciously at, like, they
yeah.
can only meet us where they're at, so, yeah, that's very fascinating.
Mm.
All right, wow, I am just loving this conversation, and the
Mhm.
time is going by so fast. We're gonna take one more break, and we'll be back right after this. Hi, everybody. Well, welcome back to the show. I am talking to Tara Kabatoff on the subconscious mind. And I'm going to divert here for just a minute. I was on your YouTube channel prior to this show, and I love this quote by Carl Jung: find out what a person fears most, and that is where he will develop next.
Mhm.
So, when we have this subconscious mind going on, we don't even realize it, but we're just bringing it into our waking life unconsciously, like the fear. And I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome. It's the same kind of thing. The more we think about it, the more it will be. Can you talk about that for us, Tara?
Absolutely. We are the creators of our reality, meaning we think we think things to be true. If we think that we are not good enough, then we are going to be not good enough, really. But that
Hmm.
that feeling comes from such a deep place, and fear is the strongest feeling and belief difficulty that we have within ourselves. It is what is fueling the world today. You can go out and fear manifests in so many ways. Fear manifests in control. It manifests in immobilization. It manifests in imposter syndrome. Shame, I feel, and fear kind of, I would say, come in hand with imposter syndrome. So feeling that, on the outside we're trying to achieve or trying to be someone, but we're really afraid of people seeing who we truly are, and being
Hmm.
ashamed of that, being ashamed of, and that's so sad when you think about it. I mean, I lived this my whole life,
Right.
and it's really sad that we're so concealed and we're hiding so much of ourselves because we're not happy with who we are. It's really
Hmm.
sad. It takes away from life, and speaking from someone who broke through that and who has shone light on on the fear within myself and understood how it was playing out in my life, and working through the motions of dissolving it. It is liberating. It truly
Yeah.
is. You set yourself free from fear and from having to prove yourself or be someone that you've been trying to be, and show up in a certain way in life. And when we try and when we're proving and but on the inside we feel inadequate and we feel unworthy, it is completely limiting us from having a full life, having everything that we may want, the kind of life and success. But sometimes we also don't know what that means if we're really operating from fear. We
Right.
may be
Right.
very limited in our perceptions and in our reality of how great life can be. And if we
Hmm.
haven't lived life outside of fear, if we haven't lived life maybe in a happy and harmonious relationship, or maybe living life abundantly, if we haven't had that before, how do we know what it feels like?
Right, right. And don't you think there's the fear of failure? Like there's so many people that fear
Huge.
because they don't want to
Absolutely.
fail, and really that's life. Like they're not really failures, they're discoveries. It's
Mhm.
growth, and it's the failures that lead us, but yet people have to really get vulnerable and real and go deep to really just get out of their comfort zone, right?
Well, and fear triggers pain. So,
Mm,
or failure, I would say, would trigger pain of
right.
inadequacy, or it can manifest in so many ways. It can trigger many different responses in ourselves. But when we fail, I mean, there are some people who can fail and come right back. There are some
Mhm.
people who will
Yeah.
fail and they may unfortunately end their life, or you'll never hear from them
Yeah.
again. They might be hiding in shame,
Hmm.
so that all depends on their belief system at the core level.
Yeah. That's an excellent point because you're right. There are people that fail and they just come right back and they don't think twice about it. Or, even like an example, like people that go through a divorce and let's say, the guy loses all his money. Like there's some guys are like, okay, so I'm just going to start all over again. And then there's some that are like, really fearful. I mean, I've
Mhm.
seen that happen a lot. And there's people that, will just get right back up and go, okay, I'm just going to reinvent myself and do this all over again. And it's like that vision and that failure doesn't bother them. But if you're not, if you haven't had that, within you to begin with, then you're really going to be operating out of fear, like fear of failure again. And then that's uncomfortable. I mean, that's a lot of the
Mhm.
reason why people don't do this work because it can be uncomfortable, but what they don't understand is that it's truly liberating. Like it's your soul's independence totally.
It's powerful. When you're in fear, you are disempowered. You are not functioning fully. You are
Mhm.
not living to your full potential, and you are not inspiring others. You're not creating a sustained and healthy environment around you. When you're operating authentically, it is so powerful. It is so
Mhm.
it's liberating. It has it's limitless in its abilities. I mean, you tap into limitless creative opportunities. You create meaningful relationships. Your body's healthy. Your mind is healthy. You're in
Mhm.
flow. And it's not constant, and it's not. I'm not perfect.
Right.
I'm not 100%. But I now know, and you and I spoke about this earlier as well. It's sort of I've gone from that big massive death and rebirth phase, like that
Mhm.
big huge turning point into these
Mhm.
like micro death and rebirths that happen every now and then. They may happen maybe once a month, or for a while it was like, honestly, I felt like it was every day going through this like kind of like going through the tumble cycle or something. But every time I come out of it, I feel different. I feel renewed. I have a greater perception. I'm more in touch with my heart, with my emotions. And our emotions and our heart have taken the back seat in society. We come from a very logical, analytical
Mhm.
world.
Mhm.
We're always on, we're thinking, we're doing. But our heart and our emotions and being able to connect with not only interpersonal relationships, but within ourselves, like our senses, and that
Mhm.
leads to our intuition, right?
Mhm.
And that sharpens our intuition. So we then know what path to take. Then we can see failure as an opportunity. Okay,
Right.
that didn't work because I'm glad that didn't work.
Right.
That's like
Right.
not meant to be, you know?
Yeah.
And now I
Yeah.
can see where I'm supposed to go as a result, and so
Right.
you learn to work with these cycles in a smoother way. The
Mhm.
failures, the upset, the challenges, then see, and then you can work with it in co-creation. You get to create the outcome
Right.
rather
And
than
you're building
resisting.
trust. You're building
Yep.
trust because
Yeah,
you've got that
exactly.
trust within
Mhm,
yourself. And yeah, that's true.
mhm.
So we have a few more minutes left here, and there's a few things that I wanted to ask you. I do want to have, we are going to end the show with Tara giving us a little bit of a astrology forecast for the year. So don't leave yet. She has a gift of doing astrology. She enjoys it, and she's going to share some insights into the new year. But before that, I'm really curious how, like, after you've gone through this whole transformation, what are some of the significant changes that you have experienced in a positive way? Like, how has this changed your life? And because you've gone through this and you've worked through this, is that why you know that people are so capable of doing this themselves? Like, they can get through this no matter how hard of times that they're going through, whether it's relationships or the relationship with their self, that there is a way. Like, I mean, your story alone, that was a lot. Like, you went through a lot, and I want people to really know, like, the benefits and that you can do this.
Everyone can do it. And so looking back at addiction, eating disorder, learning disability, stuttering, not being able to speak. I mean, I can talk. How liberating this feels, because I've always
Yes.
wanted to communicate. I've always had so many things to share and connect and create, and I couldn't. I was stifled. I did everything without medication. I did the inner work. It changed my life, and it can change everyone's. We all have the power. And the learning disability, I don't feel that many people in this world really have. Maybe, I don't know if I'm going out on a limb, but saying all, I feel that learning disabilities and these things that we're labeled as are basically a construct of how we've been raised, or the belief system that we have within ourselves. And if we really tap into this and go deeper within this work, we can really uncover so much, because as I mentioned, belief system connects with our thoughts, how we think, perceive the world, how we interpret the world through thought, through rational thought. And then we have our emotional state. So our interpersonal relationships, our sense of intuition, our heart energy, our connectedness with all, and our body. Right. So
Mhm,
all of
mhm,
these beliefs, these false beliefs and fears and shame really do damage on our body. It's all connected. And then our motivations and our behaviors are inspired by all of it. Right. And
mhm,
so the
mhm,
outcome is how we act in this world and what we create as a result. If we shield ourselves and put ourselves in isolation, or if we put ourselves out there and express and create and attract and cultivate, meaningful relationships, etc. So it has changed my life in every way possible because it's all connected. And
mhm,
it has really allowed me to develop more compassion towards others and towards myself and towards life and see the beauty in this
mhm.
process. And it,
Right.
it has helped me create, my work has gotten better. I mean, I do most of my marketing, all of my marketing right now, and I love it. I feel that my quality of work has gotten better. Everything
Right.
has
Right.
just
That's
improved.
I love that. I just
Mhm.
That's such a beautiful thing. It's that you've been on a journey for sure. So Tara, I do want you to tell our listeners where they can get
Mhm.
in touch with you because we are going to talk about the astrology after that, but we might get cut off because this is going to go right to the end. I already know
Sure.
it. So where
Yeah.
can they reach you so that they know?
TaraKabatoff.com. And so that's Kabatoff is my last name. It gets confusing sometimes, but is .com is my website. I'm on Instagram under that name, YouTube under that name. I have a podcast, Beyond the Veil. And those are the best places to find me, but you can contact me anytime.
Yeah, that's right. She does have the podcast. I would definitely check that out. And your YouTube is really, really good. I mean,
Thank you.
there are some great videos on there. You have to check it out. There's more about this information. All the information that you want to get on this is it's really good. Tara, tell us quickly. I think we have like two
Mhm.
minutes. Can you just give us
Okay.
a quick overview of what
All
the
right.
new year's going to bring?
Okay, 2 minutes. So 2024 I dabble a little bit in numerology astrology, just mostly to connect the dots. And I love seeing patterns. And this year in 2024 in numerology, we have a universal year 8, which is really relating to personal power, potency, the ability to manifest and create in the practical. So it can do with your career, it can relate to your health and wellness, to relationships, anything that you want to build. But the building comes from your connection with your highest self, right? So that alignment. So if we have fear, if we have shame, then we're going to be misaligned. We're not going to be tapping into our full potential. So just be aware of that. We also have coming up here. So we're recording this January 18th. January 20th, we have Pluto going into Aquarius and Aquarius season coming up. Now, this is all about AI. It's all about technology, the surge in technology, which is going to happen, and also the shift in humanitarianism. So the clashes of power between human rights and the infrastructures that have been suppressing some of those human rights or the quality of life or human freedom, if you will, but however you want to label it. But they're all going to be really pushed this year. This is going to be a big year, I feel, where we're going to see the clash of power between positive change and the influence of the old structures. I guess I would say, kind of reinforcing or imposing their power onto the other, right? So it's going to be a bit of a power play, I feel, coming up. But moving into February, keep an eye open for major shifts in technology, especially. That's going to be, I feel,
Oh,
the little bit of a tipping point in that domain.
that's powerful stuff, but some good stuff, right? Some
Mhm.
good stuff happening for
It's all, I
sure.
have to say, it's all based on how you want to see it. And I've been seeing a lot of comments
Yeah.
about people opposing AI. It's all really in how you learn to embrace
Perception.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
perception is
Yeah.
everything. So
Yeah.
we fear, we resist, we control, doesn't work. So
Right.
this is how we need to change in order to move with the times and to create something meaningful and something of opportunity, I feel.
Yes. Thank you so much, Tara, for joining us today. Your Instagram handle is what?
Tara Kabatoff. I think there's a dash in between the first and the last
Underscore.
name,
Yes.
perhaps.
Okay.
Underscore. Yeah.
I want them to be able to follow you if they'd like to. And thank you so
Mhm.
much for listening this week. I have an awesome show next week, a little bit of a different turn in the corporate world, turn spirituality, Pretty awesome story. If you want to reach out to me, soundoflife.com, I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Tara, thank you so much for sharing your story and this insightful information for our listeners.
Thank you very much. It
Okay,
was
everybody
very
have a
fun.
great week. Thank you.